and possibly even the Norwegian Constitution, but mostly this pan-European group. So we'll get to that also. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of things we want to talk about. I also want to mention, I don't know if you caught President Biden's speech yesterday. I did. Louise and I did. We were actually driving when we heard it. We had to run some equipment down to one of our employees, and it was the speech I thought was brilliant. He said exactly what needed to be said, and if you missed this speech, it's worth going to YouTube or whitehouse.gov or wherever, and just watching it. It wasn't particularly long. But what astonished me was we were listening to CNN in the car on Sirius XM for the speech. And as soon as the speech ended, the guy who sounded like Jake Tapper said to some person, I have no idea who it was, said, well, what do you think? And that guy said, well, it's not going to change anything. And I'm like, what the hell? You are shooting down our president and our aspirations for democracy in America. You're taking the side of the Republicans before even seriously discussing the issues? Honest to God, I was so pissed off, I changed the SiriusXM channel from CNN to MSNBC, where they were actually having a thoughtful conversation about what it would mean if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema were to change their minds and say, okay, we cut a hole in the filibuster just 2-3 weeks ago to get the debt ceiling, in abeyance so that we could keep the government from shutting down. We drilled a hole into the debt ceiling when when Donald Trump wanted to appoint Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. That was a permanent hole they drilled in the filibuster. It used to be you couldn't use the filibuster. You could use the filibuster to stop appointments to the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell did away with that. Harry Reid had done away with a hole in the filibuster that allowed the appointment of lower court judges and members of the president's cabinet, because when President Obama came into office, the Republicans were filibustering pretty much every single one of his appointees and all of his court nominees, including Merrick Garland. So, we have this long history of holes being drilled in the filibuster. Donald Trump's tax cuts were passed by going around the filibuster. But, apparently on CNN, none of that mattered. So, anyhow, it just made me crazy. So we can talk about that, too. But I want to start out with my daily rant today from HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Expose, the most toxic and corrosive GOP meme ever. And it really and truly is. Over at the Heritage Foundation's website, Bernard Dobsky headlines his article with this old chant from the John Birch Society. I remember this from the 1950s, right, and then the 1960s. This was the John Birch Society's main shtick. America is a republic, not a democracy. Yeah, it's a memorable slogan. They've been using it since the 50s. That and the other thing from Senator Joe McCarthy when he said, don't ever call the Democratic Party the Democratic Party. And you always call it the Democrat Party with emphasis on the rat. And that was, in 1956 when, as I recall, when Joe McCarthy said that. And now Fox News does that full time. That's all they do. And, it's called it the Democrat Party. But this meme that we are not a democracy has really taken hold on the Republican side since the 1950s, and particularly since Donald Trump's election. Why would that be? Well, because if you're not a democracy, then the vote doesn't count, right? Democracies are where the majority rules. Now, the fact of the matter is that we are, or at least arguably, a democracy and a republic. The founders of this country were very clear about the fact that they were not reinventing the Greek democracy, which only lasted for 47 years, where the leaders of the country were drawn by lottery. And so, the consequence of that was that because the leaders were drawn by democracy, by lottery, it's the same way we do jury duty. Can you imagine if every member of the House and Senate was put into place by jury duty? Not a good thing, right? Jury duty is fine, but that would not be a good thing. And that's what Greece did. And so, everybody in the, when they were writing the Constitution, they were saying, well, we're not going to do what Greece did. We're not going to be a pure democracy. But we are going to be a representative democracy. We are going to be a constitutionally limited representative democracy. They just said it very, very clearly. And I'll give you some quotes on that. But, Rand Paul last week came out and said, he told this to the Washington Post, he said, the idea of democracy and majority rule really is what goes against our history and what this country stands for. No, it doesn't, Rand Paul. It doesn't at all. I mean, you could say technically he's correct, because from 1798, when we became a constitutional democratic republic, until 1965, black people couldn't vote. Women couldn't even vote until 1920. So, you could say, arguably we historically were not a democracy. But, that was not this ultimate idea that we are not a democracy is not the way that it was supposed to be set up. For centuries before our Constitutional Convention, the words democracy and republic were essentially interchangeable. The founders wanted to differentiate us from the Greek pure democracy. This was a letter from Alexander Hamilton in 1777 to Gouverneur Morris. He said, a representative democracy where the right of election is well secured and regulated and the exercise of the legislative, executive, and judiciary authorities is vested in selected persons chosen really, and he italicized really, and not nominally, and he italicized that, by the people, will, in my opinion, be most likely to be happy, regular, and durable. But then comes Senator Mike Lee, who last week was tweeting, democracy isn't the objective. Liberty and peace and prosperity are. We want the human condition to flourish. Rank democracy can thwart that. The Republican Party, here you've got two Republican senators talking like Viktor Orban. I mean, there are countries that are republics that are not democracies. There's a bunch of them. Hungary is no longer a democracy. You can vote all day long. You're not going to get rid of Viktor Orban. Russia's no longer a democracy. Kazakhstan is no longer a democracy. I'm not sure they ever really were. Belarus, it really actually was a democracy for a while. Democracy failed for a while in Ukraine. And then the Orange Revolution happened, where people got out in the streets and kicked out, what's his name? Poroshenko or whatever his name was, kicked him out, and now they've got an actual elected president. It's now a democratic republic. Back in the 60s, in 1964, at the Republican Convention, Nelson Rockefeller tried to bring this up. But the John Birch Society's mantra, which is republic, not democracy, he said it's essential that this convention repudiate here and now any doctrinaire militant minority, whether communist, Ku Klux Klan, or Bircher. And as soon as he said Bircher, they started chanting, republic, not democracy. And so he had to pause for a minute, and then he continued his sentence. He said, which would subvert this party to purposes alien to the very basic tenets which gave birth to this party. Precisely 1 year ago today, I warned that the Republican Party is in real danger of subversion by a radical, well-financed, and highly disciplined minority. The methods of these extremist elements I have experienced at first hand. Now, this was the guy who would go on to become Richard Nixon's vice president, Nelson Rockefeller, a Republican. And he was booed off the stage in 1964. That was when it happened. Now, this use of the Democrat Party slur that Joe McCarthy recommended back in 1956, Ronald Reagan did it occasionally, but he did it most frequently in 1984 when he was running for re-election. Same with George W. Bush. He would occasionally do it. Usually he'd refer to it as the Democratic Party. But when he was running for re-election in 2004, it's all he said was Democrat Party. And now the damage has been done. Republicans now believe that democracy is a bad thing, not a benefit or even the foundation of our democratic Republican system of government. They think our Constitution was written to protect us against representative democracy, not to institute it. And they view Democrats like, Joe Biden yesterday asking Manchin and Sinema to fight for democracy. They view Democrats like that as quaint and naive. I mean, the framers of the Constitution didn't think that. But that's where we're at today. Quaint and naive. If we fail to keep and make voting safe, if we fail to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act now, we are going to end up an autocratic state like Hungary or Russia. Is that what we want? It's clearly what the Republicans, or at least some of these, at least Mike Lee and Rand Paul want.